So this particular talk is based on outsourcing technology, and one of the reasons we focus on that is obviously because we have a good skill set of tech people here in Northern Ireland, but maybe not enough. And the ones we do have can be well priced, not necessarily overpriced, but well priced for their skills. And as a startup, sometimes it can be challenging to pay for those skills. So outsourcing is one option of building your product. Another option is in-house and using local talent versus further afield talent. So that's kind of the background of why we picked this topic, because it's relevant to startups, probably most recently with the COVID and that, but more with just funding and trying to get a product developed. So Charlene, if if you want to get started, Charlene is one of our raised startups. Her company is called Armour, and it's I'll let you introduce it, Charlene.
Hi guys, how you all doing? I am the founder of Armour. It's an online platform for small to medium-sized businesses to identify, audit, manage and keep up to date with legislation, particularly health, safety, environmental and employment law. We are due, all being well, to launch the first phase of it, which is health and safety in Northern Ireland. I'm in the next 2 to 3 weeks, hopefully, fingers crossed. So really, I just want to talk about my journey from first of all, how I ended up outsourcing. Originally, I had, just before I go on, so the Slido is #91668 for anybody who wants to ask questions. Feel free to stop me and ask questions throughout, or otherwise just stick the question up. And is it Slido or Slido?
Yeah, Slido, I think.
Slido, okay.
Slido sounds good to me.
Slido in the country. Just ask me any questions as we go along. It should be fairly short and sweet. So I started out my journey as a non-tech founder. Basically, my background was legislative compliance as a freelance consultant. So when it come to tech, the design, the development, that kind of thing, I had absolutely no idea. I knew how to send emails. I was reasonably good in Excel. That was as far as my technical knowledge went. Now, I seen the need for this particular platform, and the ideal situation for me was to find a co-founder, someone in design and development who would team up with me to help with that element of it. But as Jenny quite rightly said, I searched, I couldn't find anyone that was particularly interested, because that there are, there's a lack of sort of design and development teams or design development people here looking for something like that. So I was forced to go down the outsourcing route. So the first thing I had to do when I was outsourcing was I had to go through, I had research basically into what type of product I needed. My understanding was that you had mobile applications and web applications. Now, even right down to that, I had to then do research. And by research, I mean YouTube tutorials, speaking to everybody and anybody who would kind of give me advice. I had to learn pretty much from scratch how the process worked. In turn, I also had to then sit down and I think, believe what Matt likes to refer to it as crayoning. I had to sit down and think about what my requirements were, what product I wanted to build, quite literally step by step. Now, I feel like when I'm talking to you, for the most part of the people here, I'm talking to the experts. So the tech experts. So forgive me for using my style of plain English, if you will. So pretty much what I'd done was I reviewed a load of different platforms. I looked at the platforms themselves and seen what I liked and what I didn't like. And I quite literally decided, I would like, I'd like certain elements of that, and went through the requirements. Pretty much, I was told it had to be a clear explanation of exactly what I wanted. So to decide to outsource, I had options of looking at design and development teams here in Northern Ireland. Now, bear in mind, this is way back in October 2018. So at this point, I had no idea about the startup scene. I had no idea. My idea of finding a developer was going on to Google or onto Yellow Pages. And that's quite literally what I done. I got a number of referrals to a couple of Northern Ireland companies. But prior to that, I had to sit down and research the lingo. And basically what I mean by that is I had to figure out, or I had to certainly portray a sense of confidence with tech, because I thought I'm going to go into these design and development companies and they're going to take the hand out of me and they're going to just say, oh, well, that's going to be 50 grand. And I had to portray that I knew something. I knew I didn't have to be an expert, but that I knew something or knew a bit of what I was talking about. So fast forward 2 or 3 months, I think I got quotations from about 6 companies in Northern Ireland, 2 of which were from referrals from others, and the other 4 were quite literally Google. The vast majority of them said, no, what you're looking for is too small, we're not interested. I obviously went to the bigger companies, not realizing. I've actually forgotten their name, but they're all, Hall Street was one of the places. So it took me the guts of about 3 months between coming up with the requirements, meetings back and forth to different companies. And ultimately what happened was they'd just come back and their prices were just, I couldn't justify the prices because I was bootstrapping the entire process myself. So at that point, I kind of felt like I'd hit a wall and I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And having spoken to a couple of other startup companies at the time, they had mentioned about, you know, using design development companies further afield. They'd explained to me the process, I suppose, they explained to me the process a bit better, and I'd learned the process from how to design and develop a platform, a web application platform. And it was described to me as building a house. Someone said to me, if you think of the wireframes as the drawings, and the UX and UI as the internal and external finishings. And for me, that really made sense because I had absolutely no idea. I was having all this different lingo being fired at me and I had absolutely no clue what it was. So I went to the Northern Ireland companies anyway. They come back, say the prices themselves, I couldn't justify them. So then I found another source called Upwork. And what Upwork was, I'd used it to have my logo, etc. design, because at the same time, I had no idea where to go for something like that. So I then, I had my requirements in hand and I had them reasonably well refined because I'd spent a lot of time with the developers here in Northern Ireland, different people giving me advice, all that sort of thing. So I put my requirements up on Upwork. Now within reason, it was pretty much an overview of what I wanted to build. It wasn't a step-by-step guide or anything like that. So within about an hour, I think I had about 20 applications. Now I will say that I was very hesitant about this, purely on the basis that I never really dealt with, I've never really outsourced to Europe or America or anywhere else. So I was very concerned about that, about the time difference, about the language barrier. But Upwork was great. I mean, they review all the guys who come on board there. And I had sat with and conducted Skype interviews with 4 of them and kind of weighed up the pros and cons in terms of, I had one price that was absolutely rock bottom that seemed almost too good to be true. So I scrapped that one. I had another price that seemed absolutely extortionate. And then I come across a company who I'm using now at the moment called Milo Solutions. Milo Solutions, the process, the first thing I'd explained to them, look, I don't, you know, I'm not from a development background. I don't design or build. I come from a legal consultant background. When you're talking to me about, you know, the process, you need to speak to me pretty much in plain English in the same way that I would have to if I was working with a client on legislative compliance. So they were very, very good. The first port of call was a Skype interview with them, and it gave me a feel for the company. What I found, my findings from this was that Milo were very good at coming back. They're very good at responding very quickly. They banished my worries immediately in terms of communication, because they'd have a team of about 100 people, all of which are outsourced themselves. All speak fantastic English, which would put plenty of us to shame. And they were just really good at what they'd done. And I think the benefit of outsourcing in this instance was that I had, rather than having one full stack developer, or, you know, even as a co-founder, I had a wide range of guys who were talented in very specific fields. And I think for me, it's one thing I realized, that there are so many different elements to design. You know, there is the UI and the UX and the design elements, and then the testing elements, and there was just so much to that. So through communication, everything, all our communication, and I say it was one of the questions, the communication with Milo has basically been Skype. Between Skype and email, and then the requirements were in a Word document, and we forwarded them back and forth, and made modifications until eventually I had a conversation with them where we decided that I would pay for the wireframes. It wasn't a lot of money at the time, purely because I would pay for the wireframes, and then based on the wireframes, they would give me a quotation. And I suppose the reason that was important for me was I had this immense fear, given that I was funding all of this myself. I had this immense fear that I was going to end up with a product that was going to cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds, because there'd be plenty of there'd be plenty of people who want to help. My experience, and no disrespect to the tech guys here, the developer guys here, and I'm not saying that this applies to everyone, but my experience when I was talking to some kind of development teams, they were very, very heavily opinionated and very precious about the code language that they used, how they designed things. They were very precious about that. And for me, it was misconstrued that if I wasn't working in their language, I was doing it wrong. And I suppose what I realized was actually through one of the tech for non-tech founders classes through RAISE, was that provided you're using a fairly common code, or I think there's like 25 languages, or like I'm sure there's hundreds, but there's like provided you're kind of working with the top 5, generally you're not too bad, you know, you can scale it, etc. So we built the wireframes, we designed the wireframes, and I will say, although I didn't know it at the time, I did get Milo to sign an NDA. I know no one, I know there's a lot of people don't like NDAs and say burn your NDA, but at this time it was me, myself, and I thought, right, okay, so they signed an NDA. We got a price based on the wireframes. Once they submitted the price, I then had them, there was a significant amount of back and forth. This was over the course, I would say, in terms of the communication and stuff, was over the course of 3 months. We got the wireframes designed, and once I was happy with the wireframes, I then produced a legal tech agreement for them. I had, again, another fear of mine, and coming from a risk-based approach at everything, I thought, I'm not going to spend tens of thousands of pounds and they're going to turn around and say to me, oh, well, that IP's mine. So I created a legal agreement with them. for anyone that might need a copy, by all means, I can give you a copy. I don't think there's anyone here that maybe needs one, but if there is. So I had a legal tech agreement drafted up to say that upon completion of any of the development, the designs, the wireframes, that I owned all the IP, that the IP was Armour Global's and Milo in their own right at the time. I'm referring to Milo as one person, but I was dealing with about 6 different people. Ultimately dealing with the CEO, then I was dealing with their designers, their developers, their testing team and things like that. And fast forward a year later, I have been dealing with Milo pretty much on a daily basis. They're very, very fast in terms of turnaround. I will never send them an email where they won't come back in at least 15 to 30 minutes. I probably talk to them on Skype, if not every day, every other day. And fast forward a year and we're due to launch version 1, beta, MVP, whatever we want to call it, at the end of April. So in terms of the pricing and the payment, and I wanted to put this in case I forgot. Obviously I'm paying a Polish company for my services, which meant that I would be it would cost extra money for transfers, etc. I use TransferWise, and I think every time I've had to pay Milo, which typically happens, they'll bill me for the previous month. They'll bill me for the previous month, and I pay them using TransferWise, and I think every single time it's cost me 65p. So I highly recommend, if you're using payments for transfers or anything like that, to use TransferWise. And that's pretty much it in terms of the testing. I'm very lucky, and I think there's a couple of you there. Also, just to mitigate the risk in terms of the testing, and whether I had used Milo or not, this is not no reflection on Milo. I would have always got someone to test and check the code, purely on the basis, in the same way I have people proofreading my legal content. So I am very lucky. I was able to get a guy here in Northern Ireland with the help of a couple of you here who tests the code to make sure that everything's working okay, and so far so good. And as I say, we're due to launch with Health and Safety in Northern Ireland now in the next 2 to 3 weeks. In terms of the management and the maintenance, Milo themselves are going to manage all the large tasks. So if there for any changes where we'll want to implement new design changes and things, they'll work on that. And I have Simon, who's working with me here in Northern Ireland, checking the code. He's there in the event of bugs and things that just need fixed really quickly. So overall, I can only comment on the experience of outsourcing because I don't have a co-founder. But at the moment, outsourcing is working very well for me. I definitely highly recommend it. I think that it's got its benefits. Whilst the ideal scenario is that you have a team of people sitting beside you in your office, that's the ideal situation. But sometimes when you're trying to start a company, you got to keep the costs down, and you just got to, it's good to, from an outsourcing perspective, it's also good as a contingency, because sometimes if you're relying on one person to do one thing, then in the event that they're taking a holiday or they get sick, there's no contingency there. So I think it's also good from that perspective. Anytime I ever dealt with the guys with Milo, if someone didn't come back if someone couldn't do the task there and then they just appointed someone else. So I definitely do think that there are big advantages, especially when starting out to a business. And guys, that's it really. I haven't really much more to share.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm sorry, I think it's a really, really good overview of what you've gone through, and it's really tells the story in terms of researching it and finding the relationships and building that relationship up and finding the right people. We've got a couple of questions. We do a bit of a Q&A between, if I read these out,
sure.
and you can
of course, yeah, go for it.
So one of the first ones that came through was obviously you've talked about finding and building your team, but was there a language problem? I mean, I think you mentioned that. But
I definitely, I would be lying to say if I wasn't worried at the start. I thought, oh, this is going to be really difficult. And there was one of the guys I've dealt with about six different tech guys with Milo, and there was one of the guys whose language wasn't that great. And I mean, they literally replaced him. They just said, no, well, if the language is not good enough, then we're just going to replace him. So it was a bit hardcore, but no, it was definitely something I was concerned about. But so far, no, it's not. They check with me and then they check again. So yeah, and believe it or not, that, you know, they understand what I'm trying to say or what I'm asking them to do. So no, it wasn't really, with exceptions of the start. I was chatting to one guy who his English was just okay.
Yeah. And you mentioned using Skype as a communication tool. Is there anything else that you've used or maybe would use in the future, like obviously with Slack or WhatsApp or any other project management tools?
To be honest, no, probably not. Skype worked for us. It worked for us. We used the message function in Skype, email really. I've never heard of Basecamp or Trello, so I have no idea what they are. I
think they're project management type tools, you know, tasks, that type of thing.
I don't know if this, if they're similar or just, Milo themselves had, they used Redmine to log all the hours. So they were very clear with me. They were very clear with me on how many hours they spent, what they spent it on, etc. That's probably the closest thing, but I mean, I just get a report. So outside of that, I think Redmine for them was just something that they used in terms of to track their hours and the work that was allocated.
Yeah. So slightly different question here in terms of remote working. So do you think that remote working is an opportunity to grow your team and brand globally? If that's your vision,
I mean, I think it's not the way I want to do it. It's not the way I want to do it, but unfortunately we're now pressed with the situation where we do have to pivot. Could I build a team and a global brand remotely? Yeah, I could, but it's not the way I want to do it. That's not the vision. Ideally, Milo for me isn't they're in the long-term solution, but they're really just another sort of part of the cog. The ideal scenario for me is to have my own team, my own development team, that can, you can do the design and work, the development work and things like that. So I have to leave. Excuse me.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't want to focus on just Northern Ireland.
It's going a global company, but trying to find the team to do that, and whether they're based here or further afield.
For me, Northern Ireland is always going to be the head office, and I say the ideal scenario is to build a team in Northern Ireland, using outsourced development as and when.
Yeah. And in terms of chatting to Milo, do you have much social with them, or is it mostly, strictly work, or what's good, what's bad about that?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's probably 90% work. Yeah, we've had a bit of banter, but I mean, my banter is wasted on them. Equally, their banter would be wasted on me. So, yeah, I mean, they provide, for me, I believe they provide customer service, the proper customer service that you should get, given the nature of the task. So do I sit on Skype with them and drink gin and straight vodka? No. Answer to that.
Yeah. You maybe touched on this, but was it sort of paid monthly or completion of the project? I think you sort of mentioned probably more on the monthly side of things, which keeps
Yeah.
probably a bit easier to manage.
So effectively what they do is they send me a report of the hours that they worked, and the report in itself is detailed. And I was lucky enough to have some of the guys on this chat to actually have a look at the report. It was detailed to the point where I kind of understood it, but not quite. So I had to then use the likes of Simon, who I'm using at the moment, and some of the guys in the chat here, Jason and stuff, helped with that to kind of decipher. I've got an hourly rate. I've got an hourly rate for a designer. I have an hourly rate for the developer. I have an hourly rate for a tester. So yeah, so basically at the start of every month, I get an invoice with yeah, 30 days grace to pay.
Yeah, well, that really helps just in terms of manage cash flow, so you know what's coming in.
Yeah. So that's I'm also able to cross-reference it against the original quotation that I got, which I remember being warned on by several different people. Ended up crying in a fetal position several times about basically multiply by 2 and add 0 is what your platform will cost. I can confirm that's not quite accurate, but at least 3 times. Anyway, that being said, I do know I've added a lot of additional functionality that was not in the original product.
Yeah. Do you think the future of building MVPs is remote and outsourced? Do you think this will be the future?
I think for Northern Ireland it might be, you know, unless we get an influx of developers and, you know, removal of FDIs, I suppose. It just, you know, yeah, given doing what I've done now, knowing what I know, I would still outsource. I would still choose to outsource. So in my opinion, I believe remote work and outsourcing is probably the best way to do it.
Cool. A few more here. In terms of women founder here in Northern Ireland, have you found any of the networks like women tech makers and kind of the network? Has that helped you at all?
Not really. Not really. I haven't. I think I got to a point where I was getting that many opinions on what I should do and how I should do it that I felt a wee bit overwhelmed. And as a result, I didn't go to a lot of the women in tech network meetings, because at that point I kind of felt like I already had, you know, and I was lucky enough to be a part of Raise and have, you know, technical people there. So I imagine it is a good network, but I can't comment on it because I haven't been involved. I spoke to one lady who's involved in tech, and it was more of a sales pitch than anything else. So I can't comment on that.
Yep. Here's a good one. What's the one piece or most important piece of advice that you would give when coming to outsourcing tech?
Wow. Okay. I don't know if I can
take your time.
I don't know if I could narrow it down to one. And I think this applies to particularly to outsourcing, because your team aren't right beside you, but write your requirements. And when you're designing your requirements, remember this, that the analogy that I was able to work with was, when you explain to a developer how to paint a door, you have to be very specific. You have to tell them not to paint the door handles. You assume nothing. You have to explain that you don't paint the door handles. You don't paint the architrave around the door. You have to be very specific, very black and white. I think that applies to tech in general. With outsourcing tech, another very important point, and something that I'm glad I done, thankfully I've never had to use it, but was creating the legal tech agreement and the IP. So it means that I don't have to worry that the tech is not mine. There would be nothing as frustrating to have spent tens of thousands of pounds on a good tech product and realize that the developer still owns the IP.
Yep. Yep. If you can tell us, how much of a saving do you think you made by outsourcing?
I would guess, based on, I'll go by hourly rates and the rates that I was given here in Northern Ireland. I would say I've saved 50 to 60%. They exposed me to an increase there recently, but it's still over 50% cheaper than the prices I got here. The average price, should I say, because they were very varied, from £500 a day up until £1,000 a day.
Yeah, of course. It's interesting though. And I suppose overall, do you think your technology has grown by going through this process?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's only the start. In terms of, I think that I've noticed the difference in the requirements that I developed, way back in web early last year in January are absolutely, I wouldn't even say the fundamentals are even the same. So to say that, yeah, it's grown. Yeah, it's slow and steady. The plan is to obviously build a product that I can scale into legislation pretty much anywhere in the world, on any topic. So, sorry, just has my tech knowledge grown? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a total expert. Don't need Colin, don't need Jason. Yeah. No, it has. It absolutely has. Probably more than I've realized, because I start to use words like wireframes, which might seem simple to some, but when I'm saying it to the layperson, they're looking at me as if I'm crazy. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got through the questions there. That was really good. Some really good insights in terms of your team, your product, your experiences, and your advice. Some really good nuggets of advice there. And if anybody has any more questions, we've a wee bit more time. We throw them into Slido or even in the chat here. And we've got as I said, a wide range of people in the meeting here tonight, including some of our own raised startups, some of the tech people that have helped Charlene, and some new faces as well. Yeah, if you've got any further questions or want to jump in here, please feel free to do so. Yep, got a few more questions coming down here just while I'm chatting. Give me a second. A technical question, I believe. Did you use Firebase or full backend? Now, those are two words that I don't know what they mean. So yeah, if you know what they mean.
My definition of backend has got nothing to do with technical, so I'll let some of the tech guys answer that. No, I have no idea what those things are.
Colin or Jason or Matt, what's the difference between Firebase and backend? Or Dave?
From when I originally looked at things a little while ago, no, we weren't using Firebase. It was going to a traditional database server. But it's been a long while since I've looked at anything, because Simon's been more involved than I have.
So is this in relation to the database that it would be using then, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I perhaps I'm not answering the question right, but I mean, is Python, is that the database? Is that what they're talking about?
So
or not Python, Django. I'm using Django. Is that the database?
So Django's a web framework which is written in Python. So Django, the code within the Django framework would talk to the database. So in fact, it's that long since I've looked at things, I can't remember what the database system was. And I remember quizzing the tech guys about it. back then, and I just can't remember the conversation.
It's going to be it'll be Mongo or Postgres. I mean, it doesn't really matter to the end user.
Yeah, it's probably Postgres from what I remember, but as I say, it's a long while ago.
I don't even know what that is.
You see, Firebase is a full development environment, you know, for rapid prototyping, and you know, if it does what you need to do, then I'm sure it's fine. My limitation would be with it is it's one of those. It looks like it's come up really rapidly, and you don't know where it's going to be in 5 years. You know, so in most cases, I think, and certainly in your case, it was all built using a full back end. You're not relying on any proprietary technology underneath there.
And guys, would you recommend that? It was myself that asked the question, mainly because obviously the cheaper alternative I've been quoted is to use the likes of Firebase, but the developers actually were reluctant for the scaling purposes. They said you'd end up spending a lot of time to create it in Firebase, and then could possibly have to change a lot when you create your own backend.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, it would be like building something in any rapid development thing. It'll be great for knocking out a prototype.
Yeah.
But then when you go back to, you know, Jason or Simon or Colin to build it out, you know, it'll have to be built in a technology that you control. You know, because you know Firebase is from Google. In 2 years' time, they could just stop development of it. You know, whereas with much more open platforms, it doesn't matter. It's not going to be superseded. You can always upgrade. You can always migrate. You know, I tend to be a bit, all these things like no code platforms and Firebase, and even some frameworks that allow, you know, for simultaneous development on mobile platforms like Xamarin. I mean, Xamarin is really popular, but what you end up with is you end up with a development platform that essentially is the lowest common denominator of multiple mobile platforms. You know, so, you know, when you develop on Xamarin for iOS, it won't give you all the specific things that are specific to iOS. And when you develop on Android, it won't allow you to address some of the frameworks within Android. You only get the ones that are common, which means that you're already disadvantaging yourself because you're not able to actually provide that full wide framework experience. They are getting better. I mean, Unity's better than it was. Xamarin's going to be better than it was. But I would be a proponent of open source frameworks, especially because, I mean, there's a local company in Belfast that, you know, essentially as soon as they've got your code base, it's not that they own the code base, they'll give you the code, but because they tied it to a proprietary framework that, you know, they're the only reseller for in Northern Ireland, you're screwed. Nobody else can work with it anyway, you know. So that would be my take, is if you got some money to burn for a prototype, by all means, no code platforms, Firebase, whatever. But if you're wanting to do something that's going to have longevity, if you want to reuse your code, etc., then, you know, speak to your developer, and just remember that developers really like new and shiny stuff. Yeah.
Well, apart from because I'm old and boring, but
there's an open source version of Heroku that I found recently called Doku. It might be worth checking out. Just to reiterate what Matt was saying, like Firebase, I've heard a lot of negative things about recently, just in terms of like people that have wanted to scale and the price just rapidly goes up. So I would definitely stay away from it.
Okay, cheers.
I think the main takeaway of any of this is you need to be in a position for whoever develops your code in the initial part, that you can take the entire code base and be able to replicate it on another server away from them. So if you decide to cut ties with that development company at any point in time, which does happen, you need to be confident as a founder that you can take everything that company has done and be able to give it to someone else.
Okay.
So there's still a lot of value in a tech company creating a website in a language called PHP and using a MySQL database. And you can do that fairly cheaply. You don't have to go down a Python route. You don't have to go down a Rails route. PHP is still a very good language. It's still well maintained. It's easy to work with. Development can be cheap. So it is worth.
You're just not one of the cool kids.
I'm not one of the cool kids, no.
That's what I mean. But if you use PHP, you're identifying yourself as not one of the
as
cool
an old
kids.
Luddite, yeah. I've still got my pitchfork and everything.
Are any of you cool? Is any of you cool?
I think one thing important is just focus on finding a developer that you can trust, because everyone has different skill sets and everyone learns a different way. So if you find someone that is really obsessed with Firebase and can push out really cool apps in Firebase, then let them use Firebase. But if you then, or if you're just looking between what technology to use, just focus on what's most important or what's the best way for your developer to do it. Let them decide, really.
And it's also worth, when you're evaluating a company to do the outsourcing, to actually say to them, can you show me 3 or 4 projects that you've done in the tech stack that you're proposing? Firebase being a good example, that because it's new and shiny, people like to go and use your time and money to learn something. And you don't want that. You want to be able to turn the product around as quick as you can. So it's worth keeping that in mind as well. And never come to me for a website, because I can't build them. That's why I always refer people on.
Yeah. Does that help you, Dave? Are you thinking of sourcing locally or further afield yourself? Or?
Well, I was speaking with a developer actually from the Ukraine, of all places, and I've got quotes, and they actually done my first stage of the demo. But yeah, their latest quotations to complete the MVP are significantly higher than I anticipated. So yeah, I was just wondering, maybe Charlene, I don't know if you had any financial limitations initially, and the thought.
Yeah. I mean, I tried at that point, Dave, I tried to pretty much apply for everything going, the proof of concept, all that sort of stuff. There was loads of women in business stuff, got none of that. Yeah, there was financial limitations. I bootstrapped it the entire way, and I kind of had my limit. I had a limit in my head where I went, okay, I can't go any further than that, and allowed probably 50% buffer on top of that. And yeah, I worked until the original quote that I got was within my budget ×3. So it was quite literally only just, and I just built what I could. And then in the process, in the background, I was trying to raise investment. So I got my first seed round of investment, which then allowed me to take it to this stage.
Right. And how far did you get before you got that first seed, like from a technical development point of view?
I couldn't have launched it as it was. I couldn't have, I would say it's kind of, I'm not entirely sure, maybe 80%. 80%. Yeah, you do. What I find very difficult, and everyone talks about MVP and what have you, but I find it very difficult to strip it back and not limit the value of the product. It got to the point where I had to build something. It was something that was going to cost tens of thousands to build in the first instance, and it was very difficult to strip it back. The only other way to do an MVP in my case, for the purposes of raising investment, was to literally draw it out. That was the only other option for me. So, yeah, I just had to bootstrap it. I got loans and stuff, and then took it as far, I'd say 80%, up until Christmas.
And to get that first initial round of investment, do you think doing that bootstrapping was pivotal in getting that, or could you?
I personally think it was, because for me, it showed investors that I was prepared to put my money where my mouth was. You know, I was running. You know, to me, I felt like it was advantageous for me, because you know I was prepared to put in as much as I physically could in order to bring, you know, which in turn showed that I believed in the product, and I wasn't just messing around, and that I'd done my due diligence and all the work. So yeah, I definitely think it helped. It definitely helped from a negotiation perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Cheers.
No bother.
Can I ask a quick question, please?
Yeah.
So the founders that are in the room, I know Charlene, you touched on it. Did any of you think to go and try and find a tech co-founder that could build first, and was using the outsourcing the last resort?
For me at the time, it was, I tried to find a co-founder. You know, it's very difficult to find someone that's going to. I was perhaps in a different position to some. I effectively, I'm a go big or go home person, Jason. So I effectively give up for the most part my job. And my difficulty in finding a co-founder was, I thought, well, if we're going to be in a co-founding situation here, I want you to do the same, or, you know, give me more of your time or whatever. But even without that, they're just, you know, I don't know if it was because I wasn't familiar with the startup scene. You know, I perhaps if I was, maybe I could have found one better. Outsourcing to Northern Ireland become my plan B, and then outsourcing outside of Northern Ireland become my plan C. And I'm actually really happy with how it's went so far. Granted, it could have went the complete other way, but I feel like I've done enough due diligence on the company themselves, and using the likes of Upwork, you're able to see their feedback and things. So that's certainly how I feel about it.
I'm certainly not knocking it. I mean, you've got product. What I'm trying to get to the bottom of, and Colin, myself, and have spoken about this quite a lot, Matt and I have talked about this for years, is there's a supply and demand problem.
Yeah.
And finding freelance developers is really hard now. Partially down to FDI, partially down to, you know, just cutting a salary.
I think you can always find an FDI, or sorry, a freelancer. I think there's always somebody who will be able to take on a weekend project and they'll be able to hack something through.
But I also think, Matt, that's in the nicest way, easy for you to say because you come from a technical background and know where to look.
I was just about to say a big but.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 big buts. So the 3 big buts would be I
like big buts.
Yeah. You have to find them, which is not going to be easy for anybody that's not already well connected. It is going to be their weekend project. So you are then very, very limited in the time that they have when they have, you know, if they've busted their ass writing code all day, you're kind of ruining their Friday night and their Saturday. And the third part is the cost, because the cost is going to be cost competitive. You know, not cost competitive with your needs, the cost will be cost competitive with whatever they can get out there in the market. You know, so you're running into all the same problems.
It's certainly down to the amount of risk that you're willing to tolerate.
Yeah, I also think, and just something to add in this, that I recently found out, I dare say their name, Invest NI. So I was speaking to them about the R&D grant for version 2, and they don't provide the same level of grant if you use companies outside of Northern Ireland. So as well, which is helpful if you can get to that stage, but and it is significantly different. So I think where they'll fund 50% of a developer's salary or outsource costs in Northern Ireland, they'll only fund 10% or 20% of anyone outside of NI. So I think it's just something to think about as well.
A point, if I could just make a point on the issue of co-founders. If you're looking for a co-founder who, Charlene, as you were saying, is kind of all in, you know, which is really what a real co-founder is, who's taking a chunk of the risk, who's not getting paid the full salary because they're kind of committing themselves. You take, as well as somebody in this case who just has techie knowledge or who can build, you're taking on a business partner.
Yeah.
And with that business partner, if you're not really aligned in terms of all sorts of values, even just from personality mix at one end through to your kind of commercial values and all those kind of things, then there's a really kind of messy route downstream if that doesn't work out.
Yeah.
You know, and partnerships, business partnerships where they're kind of almost equal are really very difficult. And I think that's part of the problem. It's not just enough to find somebody who says, yeah, I can commit full time to this and I can do techie stuff. It really has to work, you know. And I, from my own experience, been through a number of those. A couple of them weren't great. The one I have at the minute in 65 with John Earl. He and I get on like a house on fire, and always have, which has been very useful when we've gone through really difficult times, is that we're kind of very much on the same page. And I don't think I've been on the same page so much with anybody before. And it makes a huge difference to the business, especially when things are difficult. Because it's the same as a kind of marriage. Fracture lines can appear when there's stress, you know, and that's where stuff that comes out of the woodwork and things like that. But, so there is that other dimension. A lot of people tend not to talk about it. They tend to think of just finding somebody with skills to be a co-founder. But
that makes it makes a lot of sense. I will confess my lack of patience. I probably didn't search hard enough, and I knew the you know, I had my vision, and you know, I definitely didn't search hard enough for a co-founder. But that being said, I also know haven't had a business before, and me and my co-founder, after a couple of years, we fell out, and it, you know, and I just thought, I think at that point, for that very reason, and the reason that you're explaining, I think, all right, you know what, I'll just go it alone and outsource, you know. So
just having a wee quick down the participants here. We have a couple of other newbies, Neil and Tanya. Are either of you founders or tech background? If you any more you would like to ask or add to the conversation?
No, I'm good. So very educational, learning a lot on the go. But I'm from IT background.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. Neil? No?
Hi, sorry, it's a bit noisy here at the moment. So, yeah, so again, just a non-tech founder, just trying to pick up sort of some hints and stuff, yeah, and some more information just to take us all forward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us. Guys, have any other questions or? No, don't think we've any on Slido or any here on the chat. No, that was really good. And thank you again to Charlene for taking the time to come on and have a chat to us all. There's some really good learnings in terms of the product and outsourcing, the technology and the business side of it. We're going to continue to do these webinars on a monthly basis. So if there's any other tech topics that you would like covered, please do let us know. Drop us an email or drop us a message on social media, and we'll try and make topics that are useful to the guys in the room. And yeah, we also have Silicon Drink About that we run kind of on a monthly basis at the start of the month. So the next one of that will be at the start of May. We've run one of those online, and it's been quite good fun with a bit of a pub quiz. And then we also have the Raise Startup Club, which is again a bit more on founders talking to each other and learning experiences more from a startup point of view. So there's lots going on over the next month. If you keep an eye on our website, and if you're on our mailing list, you'll get notified of that. But yeah, thank you again to Charlene, guys, and more than delighted to have you all as part of our webinar tonight. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlene. Well done, and thank you, Jenny, as well for hosting. It was a big round of applause.
Yeah. Well done.
Just in time for the NHS in 4 minutes.
You get too much drinking.
No, Charlene, you're getting the first round, Charlene. So we'll see you down in Jig at York in about 10 minutes. All right.